Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions, Dizzying Distinctions, and Diabolical Doctrines, a series sorting through some of the jargon of philosophy. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at what is the paradox of supererogation. Now, the paradox of supererogation is simply the paradox of how some actions can be morally good, but not morally obligatory. In other words, how traditional moral frameworks can explain supererogatory actions, actions that go beyond the call of duty. In this video, we're going to cover the definition of supererogatory, the three responses to the paradox of supererogation, and how this simple philosophical paradox led to hundreds of years of actual war. Now, the first thing to do is to define supererogatory. In deontic ethics, we often try to split the world into three categories of actions. Acts that are morally obligatory, those things that we should do. Acts that are impermissible, those that we should not do. And acts that are morally insignificant, those that are neither obligatory nor impermissible. It might seem like this fully exhausts the universe of potential moral actions. However, it fails to explain actions that are beyond the call of duty, that are not required, but are still morally good. These are things like throwing yourself on a grenade to save a group of people, or giving all of your money away to charity. Few would say that such actions are obligatory, but they don't seem to be morally insignificant. They seem morally better than a lot of the obligatory actions, not just optional. They are beyond the call of duty. They are supererogatory. Check out our video on common sense deontic logic for more potential logical frameworks that could encapsulate the idea of going beyond the call of duty. Now, there are several ways to frame a definition of supererogatory. One might think of actions that include a degree of beneficence. In other words, doing good, but being required to give up something yourself. That obligatory acts are those where you don't have to give up something of yourself, but you should do them. Whereas supererogatory acts are things that you should do, but you have to give up something of yourself. However, this has a challenge in that most any action you take requires you to give something up, whether it's your time, your energy, etc. So it might be unclear why some acts are considered obligatory while others are considered supererogatory when you're always giving up at least a little bit of something. Perhaps it's a certain amount of what you give up that makes something supererogatory. Few would say that voluntarily giving up your life would be anything but going beyond the call. However, it would be harder to determine where what you give up personally is enough to no longer be considered obligatory. It seems to be more of a sliding scale than a clear line between supererogatory and obligatory. Some would define this in terms of theology, but we'll touch on that a bit later. Now, before going further, it's important to note that this is largely a problem for deontic theories of ethics. Check out our video on deontic versus axiological for more. Deontic theories of ethics are those which are concerned with right and wrong actions. These are opposed to axiological theories of ethics that are concerned with virtue and vice, good and bad people. Deontic theories are things like consequentialism or deontology, whereas axiological theories are things like virtue theories of ethics. Axiological theories have more of a spectrum of good and evil. You can always be more virtuous. So supererogatory actions are not really a problem. However, this is an issue for deontic theories since they're focused on the actions themselves and they're more black and white. Either something is obligatory, impermissible, or optional. There's not always a clear space for actions that are beyond the call for deontic theories. Now, so the paradox can be framed as a trilemma between the following three statements. Supererogatory actions are good, but not obligatory. All duties are always fully obligatory. And supererogatory actions are duties. So if supererogatory actions are duties and all duties are obligatory, then supererogatory actions can't be not obligatory. They have to be obligatory. And so you can't hold all three of these propositions at once. Now, as with any trilemma, there are three ways to solve it. We can either deny premise one and claim that supererogatory acts are in fact obligatory. This is sometimes known as Anti-Supererogationism. We can deny premise two and claim that there are some situations where duties are not obligatory, qualified supererogationism. Or we can deny premise three and claim that supererogatory acts are not in fact duties, full supererogationism. Let's take a look. So, for the anti-supererogationists, supererogatory acts don't really exist. There is nothing that is beyond the call. If it's good, you should do it. period. Some forms of consequentialism take this view. You should always do what maximizes good in the world, no matter what the personal cost is to you. You full-throated should jump on that grenade if it's going to maximize the good in the world by saving a bunch of lives around you. You don't get a pass just because you are in maximizing good, just because you have to pay a price yourself. Some versions of Protestantism also assert a similar viewpoint, but from a different angle. This claims that the requirements of God are too great to ever fulfill, let alone surpass, and therefore all of these things are requirements that are obligatory. We're necessarily going to fail at some of them. And so it's not that these things are ever going beyond the call, but rather that in trying to do these things, we're always going to fail at some of them. And so it's expected that you're not going to meet all of the requirements, but there's still requirements. The concern with these views is it does really seem like we think that there are some actions that are really beyond the call of duty, that someone who sacrifices their life to save the lives of 50 others in some way did something that they didn't have to, that was better than just doing the bare minimum of what they're supposed to do. The concept of anti-supererogationism pushes against our common sense notion that there are some deeds that are both good and not required. The next view is the qualified supererogationist. For the qualified supererogationist, there are different kinds of duties, some that are obligatory and others that are supererogatory. They try to thread the needle between the two views, preserving some amount of actions that are beyond the call as a type of duty, while explaining that some duties are not the same kind of obligatory. They're kind of obligatory, but not really. So there are several different varieties of view that you might encounter. Some claim that supererogatory acts are really obligatory, they're just not the same level of obligatory. While we should put a murderer in jail, not murdering is obligatory and we should put someone in jail, we should just shun or look down on someone that doesn't give to charity. It's still obligatory that you give to charity, but we're not going to punish you as harshly for it. Others argue that supererogatory acts are those that are only obligatory in certain circumstances. Perhaps you're poor. If you're poor, you don't have a duty to give to charity, but if you are rich, you do. And so it's not that it's not obligatory, but rather it's only obligatory in certain situations. Or, while we can aspire to ideal, we flawed humans admit that we may never achieve it. Last but not least, full supererogationism. The final option is to assert that supererogatory acts do exist and that they are not, in fact, duties. This means that there are some things that are good, but are not necessarily things we ought to do. Under this view, supererogatory acts are often considered not just good because they cause some good in the world, but rather because they were freely chosen without any moral requirement to do so. If it's my job to inspect the nuclear plant, and in doing so, I'd catch a structural issue that could have led many lives to being lost, it seems less good than if I sacrifice myself to stop a reactor that is melting down and saves the same lives. The second action produces less good in the world, even if they both save the same number of lives, and the second one, I'm dead too. However, it seems that the second action is better in some way, since it is not required. I would be blameworthy, if anything, for not catching the structural error, because it's my job to find the structural errors. But in the second case, it doesn't seem that I am blameworthy if I don't do it, and it in fact seems like I'm going above and beyond for catching it. Few would blame me for not sacrificing myself. This extra level of good is a key feature of the full supererogationist. However, this raises the question of how can there be good things that we are not obligated to do? Is it really morally acceptable for me to sit by and let the reactor explode, even if I would need to sacrifice myself to stop it? Now, before leaving this paradox, it's worthwhile to note that this is one of the few philosophical dilemmas that has led to a huge amount of bloodshed in the real world. The original philosophers that were concerned with supererogatory acts were Catholic theologians, who argued that the precepts of the Bible are obligatory, following the commandments, etc., but that there are also counsels in the Bible, which are supererogatory, not required, but good anyway, such as charity, chastity, and obedience. This led to the Catholic idea of indulgences, that acts of charity and giving to the church could outweigh sins, a doctrine that the Protestants vehemently disagreed with, and instead argued that no one could ever meet the duties imposed by God, and it was not through acts, but through divine grace that one achieves salvation. Thomas Aquinas offers a defense of this Catholic version of full supererogation in his work Summa Theologica. This theological divide in the Church over supererogatory acts ended up leading to hundreds of years of wars between Catholics and Protestants because this idea of indulgences was one of the key sticking points that had great disagreement between the Catholics and the Protestants. What do you think? Are some good acts beyond the call of duty? Is there a problem with something being both good and not required? Can we ever even meet our ethical duties, or do we always have duties that we will never succeed at meeting? Does going above and beyond in one situation forgive you for falling short in another? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.